Hey guys, it's Dr. Hayes, and this is our first lecture of the Coming of Age novels class. And this is just going to be a little bit of a background and introduction about the concept of coming of age as a genre of literature, what that means, what coming of age is, the kinds of things we're going to be looking for in the text we're reading over the course of the semester. In class and in the following videos after this and some lectures I do, we're going to mostly be focusing on the 6 novels that I've chosen for us to read. So I wanted to make this introduction video to sort of give some background about, what kinds of things to look for just generally, not about any specific text. So I have some notes here, and I have a little whiteboard, and we'll try to get through this to set the scene for the class. So coming of age is a term that refers to a lot of different things. It depends on the context that you're discussing. And so I kind of thought I would break it down into 3 categories. You have cultural coming of age milestones, you have religious coming of age ceremonies and rituals, and then you have physiological coming of age milestones that people reach. So I thought we could kind of break that down and then talk about how that applies to literature. Like why is that a literature class? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So cultural coming of age. So this obviously varies from region to region, and our class is in the United States. So in the United States, culturally, we have certain milestones that people reach whenever they are reaching maturity or moving from youth into adulthood, which coming of age is what that's talking about. And so in the United States, we have certain things like when you're 16 you can drive, and when you're 18 you can smoke and join the military and things like that, vote. When you're 21 you can drink, so we have these sort of standards in the United States of like, these are milestones you have to hit to grow up, basically. Other cultures have similar things. I know the drinking age is lower in other countries. In Hispanic cultures, they have the quinceañera, which is the 15. In the United States, we have sweet 16. Or in Anglo, Western Anglo world, we have the sweet 16. In Hispanic cultures, they have the quinceañera. So that's the 15th, sweet 15, I guess, the 15th birthday. And there's other similar things like that in other cultures where it celebrates the transition from childhood into adulthood and maturity. We also have other milestones like this. These are debatable. These are things we can talk about as we read our text throughout the semester. But there are other milestones like how do you know when you've grown up? How do you know whenever that process has begun? How do you know when it's finished? And the answer is, there is no answer for that. It's not something that you're like, well, now I'm an adult. Hello, fellow adults. Like, some of you might not feel like adults yet. Some of you might have felt like adults for a while. I'll be 40 this year. Sometimes there are times I don't feel like an adult. You have things like, does moving out on your own make you an adult? Well, there are lots of people who are grown adults but still live, with parents or, other family members. What about having kids? Does that make you an adult? Well, there's some people who never have kids. I didn't have a kid until I was almost 30. What about getting married? Some people never get married. They have kids, they move out, but they never get married. What about getting a big person job, a career? Does that make you an adult? There's all these different growing up milestones that we have in our culture, but not everybody reaches those. And so there is some stigma around if you have chronologically passed a certain point in your life and you haven't reached some of these milestones. Are you delayed in growing up, of coming of age? So, we are veering more and more in our culture and in modern society from sort of requiring that people hit every single mark along the way, and we're moving away from criticism if they don't, right? So again, these are things to look for in the text we read, and those things we can kind of compare some of the older texts versus the newer modern texts, and we can kind of see how modern authors have deviated from the expected path of coming of age. So culturally speaking, you have come of age when you reach certain milestones, both chronologically in your age, but also in your contribution as a citizen of the society, and you might hit all or none of those. So we can talk about that. So I want to move on and talk about religious coming of age. So if you are a member of a faith tradition, there are some things that sort of mark if you have reached maturity, right? In Protestant religion, we have the age of accountability. I guess it's a little bit younger, but that's when you are responsible for your own salvation. You can't claim innocence anymore. It's a sort of loss of innocence. Once you are aware of sin, once you are aware of your sin nature and your need for salvation, then you are accountable for your actions after that. And it's usually pretty young. So that in Protestant faith, I mean, that's really the main thing we have as far as religious coming of age. But there are other religions, like I know in Catholicism there is the First Communion. First Communion used to be a lot older. You were like a tween, like 10 to 14 when you do First Communion. Now they've moved it back. You're like 7 or 8 now when you do First Communion. In Judaism, you have very sort of culturally famous the bar mitzvah or the bat mitzvah if you're a girl, and that sort of is your coming of age, and it's associated with the faith tradition. You might consider that cultural too, because it's it's a genetic thing as well. But the bar mitzvah and the bat mitzvah in Islam, it's a little bit more easy. It's easier to track for females, because in Islam, once a female comes of age, she has to start covering. In some sects of Islam, women are expected to cover their hair once they come of age. So you can spot a mature Muslim female from if she's wearing a head cover. In India, I don't know exactly the rules, but I know that the forehead decoration that the women wear is a different color and design based on if you're married or single, or if you've come of age, those kinds of things too. So there are some markers there. It's really interesting, and maybe we can talk about this in class. Really interesting how a lot of the outward visual cues of someone's sort of transition into adulthood, a lot of those are reserved for females. The marking, with a forehead decoration, or covering the hair, or something similar. A lot of those are females are marked out for as mature, but there's not a lot of similar. There are some cultures that have certain tattoos, like facial tattoos or tattoos for all the members, or males specifically if they have come of age. But again, I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know if there is really an answer to that, but we can talk about that in class. So let's move on to physiological coming of age. This is probably the one that we think of the most. This is the classic dreaded puberty, puberty, when, again, it's much more obvious and official for a girl. When a person with a uterus gets their period, right? They have come of age. They are a woman now. It's not quite so easily delineated with males. Males start showing physiological evidence of sexual ability, I guess you could say. I'm talking about erections. Boys show those when they're very young, and no one would say that they've even entered puberty yet. There are other things like other physiological changes. You guys know what puberty is. I don't need to explain that to you. But with a woman, when she gets her period, it's very, many cultures. Most cultures have some sort of a ritual or some sort of a acknowledgement of that phase. Another physiological coming of age marker is becoming sexually active. Again, some people become sexually active much earlier than others. Some people never become sexually active in their lives, and that's a perfectly valid choice. And I don't think anyone would consider those people to be not adults or not grown up or mature. So again, that's kind of an interesting one. And there are many children who become sexually active before they would be considered culturally mature or even religiously of age. And so that's, again, another blurry line. So I think what you're seeing, hopefully what you're seeing and what I'm trying to convey is that this is not a cut and dry, sure cutoff of you are a child, now you are an adult, right? And we have invented in our society a whole phase in the middle called adolescence, right? That didn't exist 150 years ago. There was no such thing as a concept of adolescence, this middle phase where you're not a child but you're not yet an adult. Our society, and psychologists recognized that it's not just a cut and dry thing that we can just say, oh, well, you're a woman now, it's time. And so we had to invent this whole phase in the middle. And honestly, it's getting longer and longer and longer, right? People are staying dependent on their parents longer. People are sort of prolonging the phase where they're trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives. People are postponing entering into the workforce and entering into adult responsibilities longer and longer into their mid-20s. And so the coming of age process has gotten more drawn out in our modern society. So in literature, coming of age refers to a specific genre. It's usually novels. When you're talking about text literature, there are many, many films also. Coming of age films it's a whole other category, a whole other genre, coming of age movies. All the teen movies, all the high school movies, movies set in school, it's a huge business. We start with sort of a fresh-faced green character who sort of learns some sort of lesson and matures throughout the course of the movie. So that's one kind of subgenre. But for our purposes for this class, we're talking specifically about coming of age novels. It really requires a longer format like a novel to flesh out the whole sort of journey that a protagonist goes on when they are coming of age in the text. It's really hard to do that with a short story. We don't really have time to develop it. There are I would say there's a lot of poetry that sort of captures the emotions and specific vignettes and instances and experiences of coming of age. But for our class and for the genre, it's usually novels because it's a slow burn. It's a longer drawn out, following a character over the course of their journey and change. Time for the whiteboard. Let me throw a term at you. If you've had my children's lit class before, you know this term. But if you haven't, you don't. So there's a phrase, it's German. Bildungsroman is how you say that. Roman is German for book, novel, basically. The Roman is the novel. That's where we get the it's similar in French because that's where we get the word France. Romance is what I'm trying to say. Roman is the root for romance as well. And so in French and in German, the root for novel is roman. And so romance, romantic, literally used to refer to like the kinds of scenes from novels, right? That's what that referred to. It's gotten a lot broader now. But Bildungs is a German word that is difficult to translate as one word, but it basically means self-evaluation, self-improvement, formation, formative times. Some people just translate it as simply education, but not necessarily formal school education, just the education of a person, the bringing up, the formation of a person. So it's more of a concept in English than a word. We don't really have a word that goes with that like they do. German is good for that, having one word to encapsulate sentences in other languages. But a Bildungsroman then is a novel about the formative time of the protagonist of a character. So that is a term that's going to come up over and over throughout this semester, Bildungsroman. Some people use the phrase coming of age novel along with Bildungsroman like interchangeably. Some people see the Bildungsroman as a more tightly parametered, I guess, genre that falls under the more broad umbrella of coming of age. I tend to use them interchangeably because I don't see much of a difference to, there's not a significant enough difference to me. But Bildungsroman sounds very pretentious. It's hard to say it without sounding Bildungsroman. It's hard to say it without sounding pretentious. So I that's why coming of age is probably more comfortable of a concept. But the Bildungsroman genre, the term was coined in 1819. I'm not going to go into a big deal about it, but it was then retroactively applied to previous texts. The Bildungsroman genre goes back as far as we have novels. The novel, not everybody agrees about when the first novel was, but it's in the 1700s. So just go with that. Unless you count Pilgrim's Progress, which was the late 1600s. Again, we're not here to debate what a novel is, but late 1600s, early 1700s, the Bildungsroman goes back. There have been coming of age texts for as long as we've had novels. Now, the roots of the Bildungsroman, the coming of age story, goes back even further into folk and fairy tales, where you have a character like Little Red Riding Hood who becomes of age, is sent out into the world for the first time. She encounters predators and danger and is naive, and she has to learn who she can trust and who she can't. And so there's this character who reaches a level of maturity in the tale. And so there's lots of fairy tales and folk tales that have inspired the later development of the coming of age novel. So the basic parameters of coming of age in literature is you have a protagonist, and the narrative tracks the progress of usually a specific protagonist, but I think there are some ensemble ones that have maybe come along later. We can talk about that when we read Little Women, our second book that we're reading. Little Women focuses on one character, Jo March, from her perspective, but there are definitely, it's also an ensemble with all the sisters, with their best friend Laurie, so I mean, it kind of tracks this whole group of young people as they grow up, but there is one focused protagonist, and that's typical of a coming of age novel, that you have a protagonist and you track them and follow them as he or she, they achieve maturity in some way. Okay, so sometimes this could be a literal lifetime that you're following, the progress of years, where they start the novel pre-maturity, like adult. Sometimes they're an adolescent and they have just entered into the process. Sometimes they're a child, like the first novel we're reading, Great Expectations. Pip is a little kid whenever we start, and we follow him up into adulthood. So it could be a literal coming of age over a lifetime of many years. It also could be a novel that takes place over a shorter span of time, but it's focusing on this protagonist who is forced to grow up quickly, maybe through circumstances or trauma or some sort of loss, and they are forced to mature rapidly. And so the book doesn't take place over as long of a time period chronologically, but arguably the same amount of growth and maturation takes place regardless. So that's, sometimes you see that. And then sometimes the coming of age element is more symbolic. It could be a very short period of time. Like, I'm thinking of the movie, I think it's Dazed and Confused. Yes, Dazed and Confused. This is a throwback. Some of you have probably never heard of this. It was a movie back from my era, but it's the young Matthew McConaughey. All right. And he's and he's like the young guy. Anyway, that movie takes place over the course of one night. This party that happens on the last day of school. And it's kind of all the things that happen to the characters over the course of this one night. You have the freshman who sort of grows up and learns his lesson, and the seniors who are sort of having this existential crisis about what are we going to do now, that kind of a thing. So the coming of age elements and the reaching maturation, these maturity milestones in that movie, for example, they're symbolic. They happen overnight. It's one night is when they happen. So it can be sort of a psychological, an epiphany, this sort of realization that the character comes to, and there's no going back. Before that experience they were a child, and after that experience they can no longer go back to being a child. So you will see the Bildungsroman, the coming of age novel or story, film, whatever, you'll see it occur in many different forms, with the, narratively speaking, I guess. But it's, it still counts as a character reaching maturity. And as literature, specifically modern literature, has gotten more experimental, you'll see more sort of non-linear timelines and different experimentation going on with that. One other thing I will mention about the coming of age genre is that this is not the same as YA lit. A lot of YA lit, young adult lit, is coming of age. There are many Bildungsroman books in the YA genre. We're not talking about teen lit here. We're not talking about YA. Pretty much all coming of age novels feature young people in some way. Some are children and then grow to adulthood. Some are adolescents the whole time and reach maturity, within their adolescence, as I mentioned. So many, probably most, if not all of them, focus heavily on the adolescent phase of life. But that doesn't mean they were written for children. Just because they feature adolescent characters doesn't mean they were written for teens, right? This is, YA lit, young adult lit, is written with a teen reader in mind. Coming of age novels, Bildungsroman, are not necessarily aimed at a teen reader, someone who's in the midst of their coming of age. Many times, maybe even more often is the case, a Bildungsroman is reflective. It's written from an adult perspective, someone has come of age, is past that phase of life, and is now looking back with knowledge and experience, right? And it's more of a reflective experience that an adult would read for their edification, maybe nostalgia, maybe to benefit from the lessons that the character learns in the course of the novel. Maybe even as like inspiration for, like, if you're a parent and you have a child coming up into that, reading coming of age novels might help you give you some perspective of what your child is experiencing. There's all different kinds of reasons, but I want to make that clear that not all coming of age novels are written for the people that they feature, that they star, if you will. Some of ours are, some of ours aren't. So we're reading Great Expectations. That's not a young adult or children's book. It's an adult book. We're reading Little Women. Little Women is classified as a children's lit. So those are different perspectives. Louisa May Alcott may argue with you about that, but it was published and marketed as a children's book. Then we're reading I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings, which is not a young adult or children's book at all. Then we're reading The House on Mango Street, which it could go either way. I know they read it a lot in high schools, and it is, it is taught in school, so I guess it probably is marketed as a young adult book. Then we're reading John Green, Will Grayson, which is a YA book. But then we're finishing with Where the Crawdads Sing, which is an adult novel that just came out a few years ago, 2018. So I've tried to my specialty is children's lit. So I tried to not just do children's young adult books, because that's not a representation of the whole genre. So we're doing a little bit of both in here in the class. And I've tried to have male protagonists and female protagonists and authors, and I try to have some diverse representation. Maya Angelou is African American. Mango Street is about a Hispanic in Chicago, a young girl, and Will Grayson is about members of the LGBTQ communities in Chicago. It's interesting that two of them are set in Chicago. I didn't do that on purpose, but they are. And Where the Crawdads Sing is a girl protagonist as well. So I try to have some variety of books written for teens, books written for adults, books featuring female and male characters and authors, books featuring some diverse ethnicities and cultural minorities. So hopefully we'll get a good broad spectrum. But the last thing I'll say is these are obviously not the only books to choose from. There is a huge big list. You can just Google coming of age stories, and there's like a huge big list of novels going way back of if this is a genre you're interested in. And so also the presentation for this class that's coming up later on that we'll talk about, I will provide a list of other novels that we're not reading that are in the coming of age genre, and you will pick one of those and teach it to the class. So you'll have an opportunity to learn about even more coming of age novels than the ones we're actually reading, the 6 that we're reading. Okay, I think that's all I need to say for now. I think that's plenty of background about what a Bildungsroman is, about what a coming of age novel is, and some of the features of the genre and what we can kind of be looking for as we're reading this semester. I am really excited about this class. I hope you guys are too, and I will talk to you later. Bye.